Chapter 34-32. His face darkened, but he didn't say anything because he couldn't hold it in anymore. He closed his eyes and held it in. This was the most embarrassing moment of Yi Mulin's life, thanks to the big meal she had last night. By the time they arrived at the hospital, his face had already turned pale from enduring it. When she helped him out of the car, she finally found her conscience and whispered, "Let me help you to the bathroom first. Don't endure it anymore. It's better than if it's a little shabby." He had no energy to argue with her, so he quickly went to the bathroom to relieve himself. When he came out, his steps were even more unstable. Rice Worm immediately went to help him and called the emergency department. The doctor looked at him. "Did you eat anything special last night?" "A barbecue. A Michelin chef's meal," they said at the same time. Yi Mulin's voice was restrained. "Bai Shueli, do you think the Michelin chef's meal will make people have diarrhea?" "But I also ate barbecue, and I didn't have diarrhea." She blinked. "You are discriminating against ordinary people." He was annoyed by her, so he kept silent with a cold face. The doctor laughed and lowered his head to write the test report. "Go and check." Bai Shueli took the report and slowly said, "I need to do a blood test." She turned to look at Yi Mulin, and his face became paler as she wished. It turned out that he was afraid of injections. Yi Mulin said softly, "Just take some medicine." "How can you do that? How can a man be afraid of pain?" The doctor looked at him and then at Bai Shueli. "Family member, please comfort him." Yi Mulin felt embarrassed and walked out. Bai Shueli followed behind him, holding his arm and supporting him. "Hey, the doctor asked me to comfort you." He looked at her. "You are very happy." "Absolutely not very happy, just a little bit." She gestured to him and then coaxed him. "I will hug you later. Be good, don't be afraid, I am here." Yi Mulin shook his head, feeling angry and amused at the same time, but the corner of his mouth still raised a little. Rice Worm secretly looked at him, thinking that her husband was really a little sick. When she arrived at the nurse's office to draw her blood, she was about to leave when he called out to her. "Come here. Didn't you say that you were going to comfort me?" Bai Shueli stared at him and said very slowly, "You're a man, and you're afraid of pain?" But she still came over. Yi Mulin grabbed her directly and held her in his arms like he was holding a doll. The nurses all laughed, but they did not dare to laugh too loudly because they knew that this was the eldest son of the Yi family. Lawyer Yi was very powerful. What if they laughed and he sued them until they went bankrupt? Bai Shueli bit her lip as he hugged her. "You really can't tell." The nurse took the needle and pierced it into Lawyer Ye's delicate flesh. He groaned and hugged him even tighter. "Yi Mulin, be gentler. I'm in so much pain." She cried out in his arms. He bit her neck. The rice worm cried after being bitten. So in the end, he was the one who inserted the needles, and she was the one who cried. The nurse felt a little embarrassed. Both of them were calling each other too much. So, she took the blood and went to do a test immediately. Yi Mulin was still hugging Bai Shueli. She was hugging him, angry and panting from time to time. He said hoarsely, "Am I the one who is sick or are you sick? Why are you still in my arms?" Chapter 34-33. "Oh," she said and looked up. "Are you done?" His face darkened. "Yes." Bai Shueli coughed lightly. "Does it hurt?" "It's okay," he said with a sullen face. Suddenly he said, "I'm going to the bathroom." "Oh," she said again, but Yi Mulin didn't move. She looked at him strangely. "You're not going?" "Paper." His face was even more sullen. Bai Shueli hurriedly gave him a tissue, and he quickly took it and left. She looked at his back view and smiled until her eyes narrowed. Yi Mulin looked a little cute like this. Yi Mulin stayed for about 10 minutes before he came out. When he came out, his complexion looked even worse. He looked a little weak. Bai Shueli went to help him. "Are you okay?" Yi Mulin gritted his white teeth. "What do you think?" She bit her lower lip. When she was about to speak, the nurse said, "Mr. Yi, your test report is out." Bai Shueli threw him to the side. "I'll go get it." Then she ran quickly to get it. Yi Mulin looked at her back and his face darkened. When she came back with the report, Yi Mulin was gone. She looked for him for a long time and found that he was in the bathroom. He went again and again. Ah, poor little chrysanthemum and flower. Bai Shueli thought happily as she waited patiently outside. After a while, he came out and put his weight on her shoulder. He took the test report from her hand and looked at her. What else is there to say? What does it say? Rice Worm looked innocent. I don't know it. He reached out and held her chin. You don't know Chinese? She forced a smile. I've been abroad for a long time, so I don't know. Yellow skin and white heart. He sneered. I'll check it later. Rice Worm hugged his waist and buried her face in his chest. Your stomach is too delicate. I'll be fine after I eat it. He lowered his head and looked at her angrily, but she was hugging him so tightly that her furry little head was like a little animal in his arms. No matter how angry he was, he couldn't be angry anymore. Besides, she had made him feel good last night. He sighed and caressed her. Help me to the emergency room. She nodded and obediently helped him over. The doctor took a look and said, it's moderate gastroenteritis. You'll need 2 bottles of intravenous drips. It's fine if you don't, but it'll take a lot longer to take the medicine. Right now, people don't have time to take it slowly, and it's easy to collapse. Put him on an 4 drip. Bai Shueli said. He's very busy. Right after she said that, Lawyer Yi glanced at her and said, Bai Shueli, did I say that I need an 4 drips? Rice Bug looked at him with some disdain. I know you are afraid of pain. Lawyer Yi sneered. Do you think I'm afraid of pain? Then poke one for me to see. She bit her lips and looked at him provocatively. Yi Mulin sneered even more. I will teach you a lesson when we get back. The doctor couldn't help laughing and gave them the list. Stay in a temporary ward. You can go back after the drip. Remember to keep warm and take the medicine. It's best to rest for a day. After all, people are not made of iron. Bai Shueli took the list and went to pay the fee. Then she found a small ward with her husband. Before she said anything, her husband disliked it very much. How can we live in such a small ward? Chapter 34-34. He lay down and glanced at her. Bai Shueli stuck out her tongue. I'll call the nurse. He stopped her. Is there a washroom here? She looked for it and came back. Yes. It's a little shabby. He didn't look well. To be honest, the eldest son of the Yi family had never lived in such a shabby place. Rice Worm coaxed him. It's just 2 or 3 hours. Don't bother the nurse. Look, others have stayed up all night. Hearing her words, his expression softened a lot and he kept looking at her. Her words were what he wanted, so he pulled her over and looked at her quietly. Bai Shueli stared at him and said in a low voice, You're not allowed to kiss me. I think you smell like the restroom, and it's the public restroom. Yi Mulin's face darkened and he threw her hand away. To be honest, I'm not happy either. It's hard to please you. She made a face and ran away immediately. But she didn't know that Yi Mulin looked at her when she ran away. Looking at her back, a faint smile appeared on his lips. It was a very shallow smile. Bai Shueli quickly called the nurse. When the nurse gave Yi Mulin an intravenous drip, Bai Shueli stared at his expression. He glanced at her. What are you looking at? She whispered, Call me if it hurts. You can hug me. He snorted and ignored her. Bai Shueli watched the nurse give him an intravenous drip. Yi Mulin frowned but didn't withdraw his hand. You're so brave. She praised him with a smile. Yi Mulin stared at her fiercely and endured the pain. After that, he didn't look at her and lay on the small bed. The nurse smiled slightly and was about to go out after that. Bai Shueli stopped the nurse and coughed. What if he has diarrhea later? Yi Mulin gritted his teeth. Bai Shueli? She looked innocent. I'm telling the truth. Otherwise, how could you carry him to the washroom? The nurse smiled. Mrs. Yi, you can help him. There are hooks inside. Try not to let the patient take off his pants. Bai Shueli asked foolishly, Who will help him take off his pants? The young nurse smiled again and glanced at her with a look. Bai Shueli was immediately terrified. Why was it her? She still wanted to say something, but Yi Mulin dragged her onto the bed. He hugged her tightly with one arm as if he was hugging a baby. Bai Shueli was originally a little stiff, but she slowly relaxed and complained, "I'm so tired. Loosen up a little." He refused and rested his chin on her hair. "It hurts." She was stunned for a moment and blinked her eyes. After a long time, she finally understood. She turned around in his arms and looked at him. "Yi Mulin, are you acting coquettishly?" With a black face, he pulled her into his arms again and pressed her down hard. He rubbed her furry little head and treated her like a doll. After a while, she burst out laughing. So it turned out that Yi Mulin could also act weak and mean. It was really funny to see him like this. Perhaps because she laughed too much, Yi Mulin held her tightly in his arms. She laughed until she didn't have the strength to struggle. In the end, she couldn't take it anymore and cried, "Yi Mulin, I can't breathe." Only then did he let go of her. Chapter 34-35. She looked at him and smiled. "What if you want to go to the toilet? Let the nurse help you?" He stared at her and said proudly, "I'll hold back." Bai Shueli looked at him. "Really?" He didn't speak, turned over and lay flat, covering his eyes with his hand. Bai Shueli's heart softened when she saw that he didn't look well, and she knelt beside him to cover half of the quilt for him. She whispered, "Then I'll buy you some soy milk and porridge, something light." He still covered his eyes with one hand, but he caught her hand and threw it away. "Take the money from the wallet." She took 200 yuan from the wallet, but she was still worried when she left. "Yi Mulin, you have to hold back." He took away her hand and glanced at her. The rice worm immediately jumped away. Because she didn't buy breakfast for herself, it took a long time. It took her half an hour to come back. When she came back, she found Yi Mulin's face was very sullen. "Help me to the bathroom." She stuck out her tongue, helped him to hold the 4 bottle, and then carefully tried to please him. "Have you been holding back for a long time?" Lawyer Yi gritted his white teeth, and his voice was trembling. "What do you think?" She smiled embarrassedly and helped him to the bathroom. The door was closed. At this time, the nurse came with the doctor, wanting to see the situation. And in the bathroom, such a conversation happened to be going on. "Bai Shueli, quickly take it off. You're so stupid that you can't even undo a belt?" It's stuck. After a long time, a voice gnashed, "Unzip it first, idiot." After a while, "I can't unzip it. Can you control yourself? You're like this. Who asked you to touch me?" "How can I control myself?" The doctor couldn't bear it anymore. "Come back in half an hour." Really, the patients nowadays don't take care of themselves anymore. The 2 nurses followed behind with blushing faces and looked back from time to time. Don't tell me he really did it? In the bathroom, the 4 bottle was hung up. Lawyer Yi looked at Bai Shueli. "You go out." "Ah." Bai Shueli was stunned and didn't move. His face darkened. "Bai Shueli, do you want to stay and look at my butt?" She let out a long "oh" before curling her lips. "It's not like I haven't seen it before. There's nothing special about it." He sneered. "Then why couldn't you zip it up just now?" She recalled the scene just now and immediately ran away. "Hurry up, call me when you're done." The honorable lawyer Yi only allowed himself to stay inside for 5 minutes. After he came out, it took him 10 minutes to wash his hands. She looked at his meticulous manner and felt a little unbearable. After Yi Mulin finished relaxing, he threw his body onto the bed and then sat up and looked at her. "I'm hungry. Go ahead and eat." Bai Shueli glanced at him and said strangely. The eldest brother of the Yi family raised one hand. "I'm on a drip. How can I eat? Feed me." Although she really wanted to ask him if his other hand was crippled, when she thought of his pitiful face, her heart softened. She first opened a packet of soy milk and fed it to him. After drinking half of it, she fed him a pillow of porridge. She fed him so kindly, but he didn't say a word of thanks. He directly finished eating and lay down. "I want to sleep. Call me when you're done." Chapter 34-36. He was clearly asleep, but she had just finished putting away her things when he pulled her over, one arm hugging her bossily as he slept. His body was a little cold against her back. Bai Shueli was soft-hearted. She pulled the quilt to cover both of them and said worriedly, "I have to look after the 4 drip. The nurse will come later." He said in a low voice, Sleep with me for a while. I'm so tired. This was a man's usual trick, but it worked every time. Bai Shueli stopped making a sound and obediently lay in his arms like a doll. His body slowly warmed up. He put his palm on her back and pressed her into his arms. The room was quiet. When the nurse came to remove the foredrip, she was very gentle. Yi Mulin woke up and looked at the nurse. The nurse whispered, "You're awake. Go and do the procedures." Then she went out. They all knew Lawyer Yi. He was a famous person who spent 10 million to stay in the hospital for a few days. After the door was closed, Yi Mulin lowered his head and looked at the little girl in his arms. He smiled and closed his eyes. He was indeed tired. Not only because of the food he ate, but also because of the time when he didn't have the rice worm for more than a month. He knew that not having trouble by his side was the biggest trouble. Eating, drinking and sleeping were not the same as before. She had become his concern. He would feel very sad if she wasn't by his side. Yi Mulin opened his eyes and gently traced her eyebrows. He used to think that her eyebrows were too European style, but now they seemed to be much more delicate and delicate. He smiled. After marrying him, she had indeed become more traditional. He gently moved over and kissed her lips lightly. Then he reached out and held her hand. The worm cupped its head and snuggled into his arms. Its small mouth rested on his chest, and the breath it exhaled was hot, messing up his heartbeat. In a short while, it became hot and humid. He pressed her shoulder and wanted to push her away. However, in the end, he could not bear to do so. Instead, he kissed her on the forehead. He was so gentle, but she still woke up. Her eyes were wide open. "Are you done?" Yi Mulin squinted at her. "If I had waited for you, I would have probably died." She stretched her head out from his embrace and was relieved to see that the foredrip had been removed. She lay on her stomach in a daze for a while before she suddenly opened her eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked softly, thinking that he was already very gentle with her. He was a patient, and he thought he was taking care of her, wasn't he? But his little wife opened her eyes wide and sniffed left and right. He had a premonition that something bad was about to happen, so he was about to warn her with a dark face when she asked, "Yi Mulin, did you notice that the smell of the toilet is getting stronger on you? Did you wipe yourself clean?" His face was completely dark. He immediately lifted the quilt and straightened his clothes. Bai Shueli sat on the bed. "What's wrong with you?" "I'm afraid I'll suffocate you." He snorted coldly and opened the door to leave. Bai Shueli blinked her eyes. Was he really angry? So she jumped out of bed and chased after him. Yi Mulin was paying the bill. He threw a bag in her arms and walked quickly in front of her. However, he was always a sick person, so he didn't have his usual vigor. Instead, he seemed to be bluffing. Riceworm stood and looked at him. She laughed, but after a while, she couldn't laugh anymore. He should be feeling uncomfortable now, right? He still had to force himself to endure it. Were all men so childish? She ran over and hugged his arm. He stopped and looked at her. "Didn't you think I smelled bad? I'm a little used to it." She smiled at him foolishly. He snorted coldly and walked forward. She supported him as if she was supporting Empress Dowager Cixi. He couldn't stand it anymore. "Bai Shueli, I'm not that weak. I can't be bad to you, and I can't be good to you either. Why are you so picky?" She complained in a low voice, but she still supported him obediently. Yi Mulin glanced at her, snorted, and let her support him as she wished. When they arrived at the parking lot, he directly sat on the driver's seat. Bai Shueli was not happy. "I'll drive." "You're a road killer." He snorted. "Sit there." Chapter 34-37. She sat in the passenger seat, buckled her seatbelt and asked worriedly, "Yi Mulin, can you do it?" It turned out that it was a mistake to doubt a man's ability at any time. He just glanced at her and immediately started the car. Bam! Her head hit the back of the chair and it hurt a lot. "Yi Mulin, you're so childish." Bai Shueli touched her head. "I've taken care of you for so long and this is how you treat me?" He looked at her sideways and snorted, "You said I can't do it." "You just can't do it, Vivian." She wasn't afraid of him and said angrily. Yi Mulin looked at her for a while and sneered, "Not bad. Go on. She didn't dare to. She snorted and looked at the road ahead. Drive properly. In an instant his eyes softened and he stopped talking. After a while, he took out a cigarette from the console and lit it up. He took a long drag. Bai Shueli looked at him and pursed her lips, but she didn't say anything. The car drove back to the parking lot of the apartment. She unbuckled her seatbelt and said, "Let me help you out of the car." He looked at her. "You finally said something reasonable." Although she was angry, she still opened the door to help him. When she opened the door, Yi Mulin was sitting in the car with the reserved look. He looked at her and said softly, "Now I finally know why the sense of ceremony is so important." She couldn't help asking, "Yi Mulin, what did you feel?" He was helped out of the car by her and looked down. "It feels good to be chased by someone." Bai Shueli couldn't stand it. "We've been married for a long time. Besides, haven't you always had a crush on me?" He looked at her and smiled. "It's different now. You said you're married, so what happened in the past doesn't count." She couldn't be bothered with him. He was sick and turned into a young girl. When they got home, Yi Mulin couldn't stand it and wanted to take a shower. He even ordered Rice Worm to scrub his back. Rice Worm was furious. "Why do I have to scrub your back? I took you to the hospital before dawn. I just want to sleep now. Sleep with me or scrub my back. Choose one." His black eyes stared at her. Rice Worm was shaken by his shameless attitude and said dryly, "Is there another choice?" He was still staring at her. "I choose the third one." She gathered her courage. Yi Mulin said slowly, "The third is for Sister Li to scrub my back." At the end of his sentence, his voice was almost a whisper. He took a few steps forward. "You're willing to let her see my naked body?" "I'm not willing." The poor worm was forced into a corner and stammered as he pressed his back against the wall. Then he was dragged into the bathroom. 10 minutes later, the huge bathroom was filled with steam, and the luxurious bathtub was filled with a fragrant smell. She squatted behind him and wiped his back bit by bit. "Be more careful," he said with a touch of disgust. And efforts to help him clean. "I'll take a bath after I'm done pooping." She suddenly thought of something, and her face turned bitter. "Can I take a shower?" "You despise me?" He pulled her from behind and pulled her into his arms. The tip of her nose bumped into his chest, her chin locked. It was supposed to be an erotic scene, but he had turned it into a brutal one. Bai Shueli bit her lip. "Let's take a bath then. I'll help you scrub your back." Chapter 34-38. Bai Shueli's eyes widened and she looked at him. "What do you mean?" He threw the towel to her and said, "Now wipe the front." Bai Shueli put her hand on his shoulder and looked helpless. "Above or below?" He was not in a hurry and held her hand. "Where do you want to wipe?" She looked pitiful and her voice was like a mosquito. "Can you close your eyes?" He looked at her. "Shouldn't you be the one with your eyes closed?" He paused. "Bai Shueli, you want to do something to me when I don't know, don't you? You think too highly of yourself." She gritted her teeth and snorted. Then she closed her eyes and wiped randomly. Yi Mulin leaned against her comfortably. His gaze fell on her tightly wrinkled face, and his expression was joyful. When it was almost time, he grabbed her hand and said, "That's enough." When she finally laid down on the bed, she fell into a deep sleep on top of his chest in extreme exhaustion. In a daze, her little hand was still drawing circles on his chest. "You're sick, you're too good at torturing people." The patient who should have fallen asleep was much more energetic. He leaned against the headboard and put his hand on her back, smiling gently. He saw that it was still early and sent a message to Secretary Li, saying that he would go to the office in the afternoon. He put down the phone and lay down, hugging her to sleep for a while. Mother Bai didn't know how she got the news that he was sick. Even though it was his birthday yesterday, she still asked Father Yi to come to see her son. The door was opened by Aunt Li, who said softly, "Lawyer Yi is asleep and he doesn't look well. I heard that he went to the hospital last night." Mother Yi said softly, "Then we'll take care of him here. Aunt Li, you can go back first." Aunt Li was not worried and quickly took off her apron. "Then I'll go first. I've made some delicious food for the two little ones and kept them warm." "Don't worry, madam. They are all nourishing. Mother Yi was very satisfied and sent Aunt Li to the door. She turned around and saw Father Yi sitting on the sofa, who rarely went to work. She smiled and said, "I'll go and have a look." Father Yi said softly, "The young couple is sleeping. Why are you going?" Mama Yi disagreed. "Mulin is sick. Shirley only took care of him for one night. She must be asleep now. Why can't she go? They are all her children." As Mama Yi spoke, she had already walked towards the master bedroom. She walked to the door and carefully opened it. Looking through the crack of the door, she couldn't help but smile. She waved to Papa Yi, "Come and see." Father Yi was in a high position and had seen everything. But yesterday was Mrs. Ye's birthday. He said that he would accompany her today. Unexpectedly, his son was sick and he was dragged here. Although he didn't want to, he still felt that it was too much of a fuss, so he went over. Standing together with Matriarch Yi, she couldn't help but stare blankly. His steady son was currently sleeping on his side, but what kind of sleeping position was this? His long arms and legs were holding his wife like a doll. Bai Shueli's face was full of pain, but she was still able to sleep. This couple. Father Yi had nothing to say. Mama Yi laughed. "That's good. I'm relieved." She walked to the sofa with Papa Yi and said with a smile, "I used to be very worried about Mulin and felt that he was not easy to get close to, but now it seems that their relationship is really good." Chapter 34-39. Mama Yi didn't agree with him. It's not a bad thing to value relationships. Father Yi glanced at her. Mubai can, but Mulin can't. Perhaps because his gaze was too sharp, Mama Yi was stunned for a moment. After a long time, she said in a low voice, "What's wrong with you? Isn't it a good thing that Mulin and his wife are in love? You used to think that he was too focused on his career and was afraid that he wouldn't get married." Father Ye's gaze fell on her face. After a long time, he said calmly, "I just said it casually. Why are you so relieved?" Mama Yi also looked at him as if she was thinking about it. She had been married for many years and knew that her husband was unfathomable. But there had never been a moment when he was so difficult to understand. So she looked at him for a while. Father Ye's tone became gentle. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Mama Yi smiled lightly. "Then why are you looking at me like that?" Father Yi sighed. "I just said it casually. You're angry again. Weren't you happy yesterday?" Although Mama Yi was smiling, her expression didn't relax. Father Yi only calmed down after a few cold and elegant words of coaxing. However, Mama Yi couldn't help but say, "They're all your children. Why are you so biased? You've always been relaxed towards Mubai. Mulin has been strict with you since he was young. Are you going to interfere with a normal marriage now? Are you going to let him have no joy in life?" Father Yi couldn't do anything about this wife. He looked at the direction of the bedroom and smiled helplessly. Isn't he enjoying it? Even his father didn't have such a good life. He's still sleeping with his wife. Mama Yi sneered. "As your son, he doesn't even have the right to be sick? That's not what I meant. You've really misunderstood me." Father Yi sighed. "Look, now that you have children, you don't care about me anymore." This was considered a concession, and Mama Yi did not say anything more. She was originally a lady from a prestigious family, and she was not like the Bai family, which had a weak foundation like Bai Shueli's. She could get along with Papa Yi for so many years and firmly hold on to him, so it was impossible that she did not have any ability. Mama Yi just glanced at him. Of course, there was the affection between an old couple. Papa Yi looked at her and got up. "All right, I'll prepare lunch. You go and wake the two little ones up." Mama Yi followed her to the kitchen and looked around. "Add 2 more dishes." As he said this, he stared straight at him. The Night Father smiled warmly. "Are you instructing me?" Mama Yi didn't say anything. Papa Yi put his arm around her shoulders and coaxed her. "All right, just take it as a make-up birthday celebration for you." What else could the Night Matriarch say when the superior was so subservient? Looking at the dishes he was going to prepare, he was satisfied. He went to the master bedroom to call his son and daughter-in-law for dinner. When the door was pushed open, his face turned red. The 2 little ones woke up. Her precious son was pressing down on the little girl and kissing her. The quilt slid down halfway. Mama Yi saw that her son's figure was really good, strong. And the scene was really beautiful. Just like Korean dramas, the night matriarch was once young. She just enjoyed it for a while. Yi Mulin still noticed his mother's presence. He immediately pulled up the quilt and whispered, "Mom, why are you here?" Chapter 3440. After Mama Yi finished speaking, she even winked lightly. She had to work harder, or 10 minutes wouldn't be enough. She closed the door. Bai Shueli looked at Yi Mulin with her eyes wide open and said softly, "Did your mother see us kissing?" He snorted, then lowered his head to kiss her again. The kiss was a little deeper. Rice Worm pushed him away. No, did she see it? He had just peeled her like a boiled egg, and so had he. Her eyes were getting bigger and bigger. She bit her lip and kicked him. "How can you do it like this? Yi Mulin, you bastard." He pressed her down and said, "Kick me again and I'll tie you up." She couldn't move. She looked up at him and said, "Don't move again. Your parents are here." He looked at her, smiled and said slowly, "My mother said that we still have 10 minutes. Don't waste it, Shueli." As he spoke, he lowered his head and kissed her deeply. His fingers clasped her tightly. She struggled, but she couldn't win against him. In the end, she let him have his way. 10 minutes later, he got out of bed refreshed and went to the changing room to get some clothes. He threw a set to her. "You still want to do it?" She threw the clothes on his face angrily. "Yi Mulin, you're so bad." He smiled. "I'm still sick. You treat me like this?" She sat on the bed and looked at him angrily. "You weren't a weak patient just now." He smiled more freely. He buttoned his shirt and walked over to pinch her face. "Men are all like this. Do you think I'm still a man when you hug me like that?" "I don't know if you're a man or not. I only know that you're not a human." She glared at him. Yi Mulin laughed. "Are you really that angry?" He picked up her clothes and put them on for her. He said in a low voice, "Let's go out for dinner later. It's rare for Mom and Dad to come together." His voice was very gentle, and Rice Worm enjoyed it very much. She lowered her head and said, "Oh," and let him put on the clothes for her. He looked at her, smiled, and pinched her little face. When he went out, Father Yi had already prepared the meal. However, he was a man and knew what his son had done just now. He didn't look happy or sad. He just cared about her. He could live with his wife, so his body was fine. Yi Mulin's expression was like a gentle breeze and drizzling rain. He was also gentle towards Bai Shueli and served her food from time to time. Although she had been married into the Yi family for a few months, it was rare for her to have a meal with Father Yi. Mama Yi was very loving. She personally took some food and gave it to Bai Shueli. "More. I heard from Auntie Li that you took Mu Lin to the hospital last night. It was quite hard." "Oh yes, how did Mu Lin get a stomachache?" "That was a Michelin chef last night. I will ask him later." Bai Shueli pursed her lips and wanted to say something. Yi Mulin put his palm on the back of her hand and smiled. "Mom, I drank a glass of ice water last night. It has nothing to do with last night's dinner." Mama Yi was annoyed and amused at the same time. "You're already in your 30s and you're still drinking ice water so late at night. How are you going to take care of Shirley like this? What if you have children in the future?" Yi Mulin smiled. "I won't." He looked at Bai Shueli and suddenly said to his parents, "Shueli and I are going to have a baby." Bai Shueli was stunned and looked at him. Chapter 3441. Yi Mulin looked at her and smiled slightly. "What's wrong? Are you stupid? Didn't we agree on it?" His eyes were unfathomable at the moment. She seemed to be sucked in and couldn't move. She could only nod gently and say in a hoarse voice, "Yes, we want a child." Mama Yi looked at the two little ones and scolded her son with a smile. "Why are you so serious when you are looking at such a good thing? You scared Shueli so much that she has to look at your face. I just said that you are too strict with her. Husband and wife are not subordinates, and she is not your secretary or those little lawyers. You should be gentle." Yi Mulin looked at his mother with a faint smile. "Mom, do you think I am not gentle with Shueli?" He said and looked at Rice Worm. "What do you think?" Bai Shueli's voice was soft. "It's quite good." She looked at him carefully. That careful look made Mama Yi not know whether to laugh or cry. She was still very strict and didn't dare to make a sound. However, she thought of how her son had done whatever he wanted to her daughter-in-law and felt that it was just right for a young couple like them. The man was strong and the woman was weak. They would be more peaceful when they were older. Mama Yi didn't ask any more questions, and the whole family had a harmonious meal. After the meal, Mama Yi washed the dishes. Rice Worm was embarrassed to play alone, so she followed Mama Yi. They had a good relationship, and Mama Yi didn't mind that she didn't know anything. She just taught her patiently. Bai Shueli didn't know why, but she was a little sad to be loved by such an amiable elder. This was probably her compensation for marrying Yi Mulin, so she was even more clingy, holding Mama Ye's arm and wouldn't let go. Mama Yi taught her something in a soft voice. After washing the dishes, she made a pot of scented tea and went to the balcony to drink. Just when the two women were relaxing, Yi Mulin was called to the study by Papa Yi. The atmosphere was not so relaxed. Papa Yi motioned for him to close the door. Yi Mulin was very mature and knew his father very well. He expected that he had something to say, so he lowered his body on the door and didn't come over immediately. Instead, he looked at his father quietly. "Dad?" Papa Yi looked at his son. There was some gentleness in his eyes, but more than that, there was sternness. "Are you serious about having a child?" "Of course it's real." Yi Mulin smiled and came over to take the treasured cups of coffee. He handed one cup to Father Yi. Father Yi looked at the familiar cup for a long time and then said softly, "The set you gave me, is it the same?" "Yes, I picked it out with Shueli the other day. She picked it out and said that you would like this style." Yi Mulin seemed to be holding the cup casually and took a sip. Father Yi was also playing with the cup. After a moment of silence, he said, "She has good taste." Then, his expression became somewhat unfathomable. Yi Mulin's fingers tightened around the cup. Then, he said calmly and relaxedly, "It wasn't good before, but it's not bad now." Father Yi glared at him. "Don't use the past to provoke her. It's all in the past. Who doesn't have a past? Besides, there's nothing between her and Mubai." Yi Mulin smiled. "Father, are you pleading for her?" Chapter 3442. He stood up and walked towards the door of the study. Yi Mulin also put down his hand and looked at his father's back. Father Yi stopped at the door and turned back gently. "Surely looks like a child from an ordinary family. She doesn't look like a child from the Bai family at all." Yi Mulin's heart skipped a beat and he called out softly, "Dad." Father Ye's eyes became a little deep and unpredictable. He looked straight into his son's eyes and smiled lightly. "Mulin, you haven't called me Dad for a long time." He had always called him father respectfully. His eldest son, Z, was very perceptive. It was a pity that he didn't follow Z. Yi Mulin took a few steps forward and whispered as if he was begging, "Dad, I like Shirley very much. I have liked her for many years." It was not a confession but a request. As smart as he was, he had already felt the atmosphere of a storm. Father Ye's expression didn't change. He smiled lightly. "Didn't you say you want to have children? That's good. It's best if you can have a pair of twins at once." Yi Mulin couldn't be obsessed with his words, so he just smiled. Father Yi patted him on the shoulder. "Mulin, you've grown up." After that, Han Jiu looked at him deeply, opened the door and went out. Yi Mulin stood for a while before going out. He took 2 steps and then turned back. Father Ye's cup of coffee was left on the desk without a sip. He looked at it quietly for 2 seconds and hurried out. After going out, he heard Mother Yi complaining, "You've only been here for a while and you want to leave. You are a heartless father." In this world, probably only Mother Yi dared to say that to Father Yi. She said it with a little coquettishness. Father Yi hugged her. Children also need a private life. He took Father Yi with him and looked at the young couple deeply. "Your mother and I are waiting for the good news. Mulin, don't let me down." Yi Mulin said with a smile. He held his rice worm with one hand and rubbed her hair. After a while, he seemed to think of something. "Go and hug Mom to say goodbye." She went over and hugged Mother Yi. Mother Ye's heart ached. She wished she could make some treasures out of her body and give them to her little wife. She shook for a long time but didn't shake. Bai Shueli looked at Mother Yi in confusion and asked in a low voice, "Mom, do you want me to scratch you?" Mama Yi smiled reservedly. "I'll bear with it." Bai Shueli nodded. At this moment Yi Mulin spoke again, "And what about Dad?" The worm stared at him. "Does Dad want a hug too?" Yi Mulin's gaze was a little deep, she couldn't understand it. Mama Yi was also a little confused. When did her son become so generous? But she still wanted her husband to be more friendly, so she stood aside, which was equivalent to acquiescence. Bai Shueli braced herself and stepped forward to hug Father Yi gently. "Dad." Father Ye's expression had the gentleness of a superior. He patted her shoulder and said, "Go home with Melindo when you have time." She nodded and watched the two old ones go out. Mama Yi turned back and winked. "Next time we go back, I have something good for you." Rice Worm's eyes curved into crescents as he smiled. "Thank you, Ma. I'll take good care of Mulin." Mama Yi was very satisfied. She kept praising her when she went out. Inside, Bai Shueli saw Yi Mulin frowning as soon as she closed the door. She snorted in dissatisfaction, "Look, Mom and Dad just left, and you're about to reveal your true nature." Chapter 34-43. She struggled and screamed as he pressed her down. Actually, she knew what he liked. Thus, the more she struggled and screamed, the more indulgent he kissed her fingers, until the two of them couldn't stand it anymore. He stopped and looked at her from above. "What's wrong?" She was confused by his gaze. Her little hands pulled on the buttons of his shirt. Her eyes were full of love. If she was like this in the past, he would never let her go. But now, Yi Mulin thought about what his father had said. He thought about all the details carefully. The way he frowned was also very beautiful. She just lay there. Her white fingers gently stroked his eyebrows and looked at him carefully. Yi Mulin withdrew his gaze. He looked at her and smiled. "Why are you looking at me?" She hugged his neck. "What were you thinking about just now?" The expression on her face was too cute. It was completely immersed in love. He looked at her and smiled. "I was thinking about having a child." When he mentioned this, she couldn't help but protest. "I didn't say I wanted to have a child. What if I didn't agree?" Yi Mulin kissed her wantonly. His fingers were entwined with hers. He kissed her until she almost couldn't breathe. Then he asked her in a low voice, "What about now? Are you willing?" Rice Worm's eyes were like water. She bit her lip. "No." He directly did it on the sofa. She screamed and hugged him. Her voice was trembling. "Yi Mulin, you're crazy. You just got better. You still want to take medicine." "I don't want to eat anymore." He breathed in a low voice and kissed her lips lightly. Why would he need medicine when she was here? Her eyes widened. She looked at the handsome face in front of her that was slightly distorted because of passion. She didn't dare to look at him, so she closed her eyes. But he didn't let her go. He murmured, "Shueli, look at me." He put his hand on her back and held her in his arms, holding her sweetly but with a trace of pain. Yi Mulin only knew at this moment that love was sweet and sour. But no matter how sour it was, he couldn't bear to let go. In the heat of passion, he firmly held her hand and softly spat out the emotions he had never shown to others. "Holding your hand, we will grow old together." She stared at him with wide eyes. He could not stand such an innocent gaze. He lowered his head and kissed her. His hands held her tightly, just like how he had forcefully intervened in her life. Between the ups and downs of life and death, she vaguely heard him murmuring, "Bai Shueli, since you've started, don't give up so easily, understand?" She didn't really understand. However, he was unwilling to say more and just kept occupying her. For a patient's physical strength, this was a little too good. When it was over, she snuggled into his arms and said, "It's cold." Yi Mulin held her in one arm and held a cigarette in the other. He was smoking after the meal. Bai Shueli was annoyed and angrily took the cigarette butt from his lips. "You said you were going to have a baby, and you still smoke." He had asked for it twice just now, but he didn't take any precautions. Yi Mulin looked at her in confusion. Rice Bug said somewhat angrily, just now you didn't even use that." He didn't care about the cigarette, but gently touched her lips. You mean condom? She was furious. Contraceptive. Chapter 34:44. When he bent down again, she put her hand on his shoulder and said softly, No. Yi Mulin stopped and looked at her. Rice Worm hugged his waist shamelessly and buried her face in his neck. I'm tired and it still hurts. Yi Mulin chuckled and rubbed her gently. Does it still hurt? Her face was so comfortable against his warm skin that she wanted to sleep. He was afraid that she would catch a cold, so he carried her back to the master bedroom. It was very quiet in the afternoon and it was suitable for them to sleep together. She was half asleep and said in a low voice, Yi Mulin, do you want a boy or a girl? He was silent for a moment and reached out to rub her hair. I want a boy. As for the reason, they both knew. Bai Shueli yawned and didn't object. She just said in a low voice, Then you have to work harder. He smiled, lowered his head and kissed her forehead. He didn't say anything. After she fell asleep, he got up quietly and prepared to go to the office. He didn't forget that he had an important appointment at 3 o'clock. Bai Shueli woke up as soon as he came. She opened her eyes and hugged him from behind softly. You still want to go to the office when you are sick? He turned around and kissed her for a while. I have something important to deal with. You can sleep for a while. She grunted vaguely and lay back, drifting into sleep. Yi Mulin buttoned up his shirt and fastened his belt. He was going to leave, but when he saw her sleeping softly, he felt a little reluctant, so he bent down and kissed her for a while. Then he said in a hoarse voice, I'll come back early. She opened her eyes and put her arms around his neck. Lawyer Yi, can I ask for leave? He raised his eyebrows. Rice Worm looked at him carefully and said very slowly, Gu Changfeng came back from abroad. He invited me to dinner and I agreed. I told you last time. Yi Mulin was still looking at her with a somewhat deep look. Her little hands played with his buttons fawningly, and her little hands touched Momo West's. You can't be so stingy, I've promised her. But I will never break my shoes during dinner. He was so angry that he laughed. He reached out and pinched her little face. Send me the restaurant's address. I'll pick you up after I'm done. I'll drive, she said weakly. Take a taxi. I'll pick you up later. Be obedient, he insisted. Otherwise, you're not allowed to leave. She hugged him tightly. Domineering. Then are you going to listen to me? He hit her butt and looked at her with a burning gaze. The rice worm rubbed its little face against his. Be good. He laughed and pinched her face in revenge. I shouldn't have promised you. Keep your distance, okay? She let out no sound. Yi Mulin got up with satisfaction and went to the changing room to pick up a gray windbreaker before leaving. She lay on the bed and looked at him. He looked really good in his trench coat. As she watched, her heart warmed up and she rolled a few times on the bed. After a while, his phone rang. It was a message from Yi Mulin. Sitting in the car, he typed, Bring your phone with you when you go out, it's convenient for me to check on you. She held her phone and replied him with a few words, Bossy. Yi Mulin smiled, started the car and left. When he left, his eyes fell on the BMW that she often drove. After a few seconds, he looked away. After a while, he thought of something and dialed her number. Bai Shueli picked it up. Chapter 34:45. She sticks out her tongue. Got it. Yi Mulin hangs up the phone with a smile and focuses on driving. His stomach is still a little uncomfortable, so he asks Secretary Li to make him a cup of Shu Wei Ning. Didn't he say that he doesn't need to take medicine? After drinking it, he feels much better. After a while, the client comes over. It is a very important criminal case, so Yi Mulin still spends a lot of energy on it. After sending the client away, he raises his hand and looks at his watch. It is already 5 o'clock. He stretched himself and asked Secretary Li, You don't have any appointments today, right? Secretary Li shakes her head. No, Lawyer Yi. If you are not feeling well, you can leave in advance. Yi Mulin is about to speak when his phone rings. He looks at it and finds that it is a message from Bai Shueli. She and Gu Changfeng have an appointment at Xianlin Restaurant, which is not far from the office. Yi Mulin puts his phone in his pocket and says lightly, Everyone has been working hard these days. Secretary Li, please count the number of people and order a meal at Xianlin Restaurant. Xianlin Restaurant? Team building? Lawyer Yi is so generous. The average consumption of Xianlin Restaurant is 2,000, which is the best of the high-end restaurants in B City. They usually don't want to eat in Xianlin Restaurant even if they want to buy a bag. Secretary Li is very excited. After announcing the news, the office is boiling. The female lawyer and the secretary are complaining that they are not dressed well enough and carry their bags well. As Secretary Li expects, all of them are present and no one is absent. There are more than 20 people, and it is less than 100,000 yuan per person, which is enough for Lawyer Yi. She immediately booked a table and came over to meet Yi Mulin. Yi Mulin had already started to prepare to leave. He took his briefcase and walked out. Secretary Li watches her boss leave happily and then quickly goes to touch up her makeup. The people of the office gather in the parking lot of the restaurant and go in together. As soon as they go in, they are stunned. Is the woman who is sitting with a super handsome man still Lawyer Ye's wife? Wow, she is really radiant today. She looks like her first love. Secretary Li takes the lead and stops. Then he looked at Lawyer Yi. He thought he would see Lawyer Ye's dark face, but it was like a spring breeze. He walked directly to Mrs. Yi and leaned over to kiss her lips. Let's go back together later, and? Bai Shueli looked up at him. Yi Mulin. He straightened his body and stretched out his hand towards Gu Changfeng. Mr. Gu, long time no see. Gu Changfeng stood up and shook his hand. Yes, I haven't seen you for a long time. Many things have changed. Yi Mulin smiled. It's different for Mr. Gu, but for me, everything is the same. It's good. With that, he leaned over and whispered to his wife, don't drink. Rice Bug grunted in acknowledgement and watched him walk into a large room at the side. The atmosphere in the private room was rather gloomy. Yi Mulin lit a cigarette and looked around. What's going on? Secretary Li said in a low voice. Lawyer Yi, why don't you handle your family affairs first? He laughed dryly. What kind of family matters could there be? It was Shirley who made an appointment with someone to eat here, so I booked this place and brought her home. His attitude was the same as usual. Slowly, everyone believed him and the atmosphere warmed up again. Chapter 3446. On the other side, Bai Shueli heard the phone ringing and took a look. It was from Yi Mulin. There were only a few words, don't drink, or, she felt ashamed of the ellipsis at the end. He was so shameless. Her face was tinged with a faint blush, and she hurriedly threw down her phone. Gu Changfeng smiled faintly. Is it from Yi Mulin? Bai Shueli quickly denied. No, how could it be him? It's an advertisement. Gu Changfeng smiled. At this time, Bai Shueli's phone rang and the name of Yi Mulin shone brightly. The atmosphere was a bit strange. Rice Worm squeezed out a smile. Well, it's a coincidence. She picked it up and said in a low voice, What's up? Yi Mulin said in a low voice while smoking, Why didn't Bai Shueli reply to my message? I am eating, she said the 4 words with the utmost familiarity, through gritted teeth. The other side smiled gently, Then I won't bother you anymore. Bai Shueli put down the phone and looked at Gu Changfeng. Gu Changfeng, old people are all like this. Gu Changfeng smiled. Really? The old person you are talking about is Yi Mulin? Of course. She leaned closer to him. You don't even know that there's a generation gap between him and me. Old people are just stubborn. They can't be persuaded, and they're especially stubborn and rich. It's as though he's the richest person in the world. Look at how he's so ostentatious when he's building a team. Gu Changfeng held the aperitif and was still smiling. Bai Shueli was satisfied after complaining. She was about to eat the delicious food when a gloomy voice came from behind. I am an old person? Stubborn, and rich, huh? Rice Worm was stunned on the spot. The fork in her hand fell, making a crisp sound. She didn't turn back but looked at Gu Changfeng, biting her lips. Gu Changfeng, why didn't you tell me? Gu Changfeng smiled. I wasn't sure that you were talking about Lawyer Yi, but now it seems a little late. There was a touch of regret and disappointment in his eyes. She fell in love with this strong man after all. Yi Mulin smiled at Gu Changfeng and placed his hands on the girl's shoulders. He exerted some force and said, "I will settle the score with you later." After saying that, he left and didn't send any more harassing messages. However, Bai Xueli's heart trembled as she ate the meal. Gu Changfeng looked down and said, "Xueli, have you ever thought whether you are afraid of him or afraid that he will be angry? Is there a difference?" She picked up the fork listlessly. Gu Changfeng smiled faintly. "The difference is quite big. Think about it carefully." He changed the topic. "Oh, right, I have something to tell you. I want to take a themed photo for an international award. I've looked for a lot of models, but none of them are what I want. Finally, I thought of you. I think you're very suitable. Do you want to try?" Bai Xueli was a little dumbfounded. "Me? Be your model?" He nodded and took out a large stack of money from his bag. After counting it, there seemed to be hundreds of thousands of yuan. "Here's 500,000 yuan. The shooting time is 3 days, but we might have to go somewhere else. Think about it." He looked at her seriously. Bai Xueli's eyes sparkled as if she had seen money for the first time. Chapter 3447. Bai Xuelan stared at the 500,000 yuan. After a long time, she asked in a low voice, "As long as you take a few photos, they will all be mine, right?" Gu Changfeng smiled, "Yes." After that, Bai Xueli had already put the 500,000 yuan into her Hermes platinum bag. She said in a low voice, "I'll take it." Gu Changfeng leaned back and chuckled, "Don't you need to discuss it with Yi Mulin? Why should I discuss my own business with him? Besides, I am making money for my family," she said childishly. But she was a bit annoyed. She only put about 200,000 yuan into her platinum bag, and it was stuck when there was still 300,000 yuan left. Gu Changfeng gave her the bag with a smile. "Put it in this." "Why didn't you say so earlier?" She glanced at him and put the money in the bag quickly. Gu Feng didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he realized that she did everything slowly. There were only 2 things that were especially fast. One was chasing men, and the other was counting money. But she had chased after all the men, but the one she married was the one who had been chasing after her all the time. Gu Changfeng chuckled softly, but it was a bitter smile. He didn't tell her that the series he was going to shoot was called First Love. He did find a lot of models, but he couldn't catch the innocence in their eyes and what he wanted to express. Bai Xueli was the only one who could give him what he wanted, so he came to her. He had never felt that his presence would cause any changes to Bai Xueli's marriage, because Yi Mulin had always been the dominant one between her and Bai Xueli, and always had been. Gu Changfeng whispered, "Are you sure you want to go to Sea City?" Bai Xueli looked at him and said slowly, "Won't you go to shoot pink grass?" He smiled, "You know that too? I am an internet celebrity." She took a sip of wine and bit her lip. It should be okay. The point was that she had been paid, so she had to convince the old man. Gu Changfeng didn't say anything more, but just gave her a contract. He had mixed feelings during the meal. He couldn't tell whether Yi Mulin's appearance was good or bad. He had no romantic thoughts, neither did Bai Xueli. But that man showed up in such a big way, which showed how much he cared about her. Gu Changfeng thought to himself that it was good. In the end, he still left early. It was not even 8 o'clock. He stood in the hall and whispered, "I'll wait for your news." The crystal light in the hall shone on his face, making him look clean. Bai Xueli suddenly felt that he was really a very good person, so good that the things she had done in the past seemed particularly inhumane. His mood was a little complicated. For the first time, he was reflecting on whether he had hurt someone. He absent-mindedly replied, "Can I tell you tomorrow morning?" He smiled as if he wanted to reach out and touch her head, but then he retracted his hand. "All right, I'll go back first." He looked inside. "Hurry up and go in. Don't run around." Bai Xueli nodded. She was quite obedient. She and Gu Changfeng had known each other since they were young, and she had a guilty conscience when it came to relationships, so she was especially nice to him. Gu Changfeng looked at her deeply before leaving. Bai Xueli looked at his back for a while and didn't go in immediately. She just casually sent a message to Yi Mulin. Chapter 3448. She thought to herself that it was not suitable for her to go to the team building. She put away her phone and wanted to go out to take a taxi. But she had only taken one step when Yi Mulin called her. She picked up the phone and said, "You, come here." His voice was gentle. "Wait for me. I'll be ready in a moment." Bai Shueli suddenly turned around and saw Yi Mulin standing not far away with his phone in his hand. She bit her lip and walked over. "How much longer do you have?" He took the bag from her and frowned. "Have you been drinking?" "A little," she whispered and looked at his face. Yi Mulin helped her carry the bag and held her shoulder with one hand. "Go in any more." "I'm full." She looked at him strangely. Yi Mulin chuckled. "You've met your first love. I was afraid that you wouldn't be in the mood to eat and would only be looking at her." She was furious. "Stop slandering me." But when they entered the private room, she slapped herself in the face. Because he had ordered a few of her favorite dishes for her. So she was full and ate for a while, feeling very satisfied. She put down the chopsticks and met his gaze. She bit her lower lip. "It's my favorite food." Yi Mulin drank his tea slowly and smiled. "Didn't Gu Changfeng order for you just now? How would he know what I like to eat?" She whispered, "Yi Mulin, you are too petty. Everyone here is from your firm. Can't you be more shameless?" He had brought a whole firm of people to catch them in the act. Yi Mulin glanced at her, smiled and didn't say anything. But his eyes fell on the extra bag. He felt that it was money and it was given to her by Gu Changfeng. Why did Gu Changfeng give her money? Yi Mulin didn't say anything and poured her a glass of red wine. Bai Shueli didn't drink it and just chatted with Secretary Li. The atmosphere in the surroundings was also very peaceful. Yi Mulin played with the glass in his hand and smiled. "Do you want to go to the club to relax?" Bai Shueli looked at him. He smiled. "What's wrong? You've just recovered. You can't drink and you have to drive," she reminded him. Yi Mulin was sitting with her, so he naturally put her on his shoulder. He said to his subordinates in the office, "I won't drink. I'll just participate." Secretary Li naturally gave face to her boss the most and said, "Lawyer Yi is responsible for paying." Yi Mulin smiled. "I drank too much. I'll have half a day off tomorrow." Fuck, there was actually such a thing. The group of people was boiling with excitement. However, the boss smiled again. "You are about the same age as Shirley. She likes to play too. You can take her with you later. As an old man, I will sit by the side." Bai Shueli wasn't a fool. She knew that this was a mission given to her subordinate to make her drink. She had no choice but to whisper, "Aren't we supposed to prepare for pregnancy?" He smiled but didn't say anything. "It's okay to drink some red wine." As he spoke, he seemed to recall something and opened Bai Shueli's bag. "My wife is treating us today." He pulled it open and inside was the shiny, white money. Bai Shueli's heart ached. That was the money she had earned. How could he take it away so shamelessly? But in front of so many people, she couldn't do anything. She could only watch. Chapter 3449. It hurts. Bai Shueli slapped his hand away and stared at him. How could he use her money and touch her cheese? Yi Mulin stretched out his long arm and put it around her shoulder naturally. He looked at her and said, "As the boss's wife, can't you bear to pay for a meal?" "I don't earn money. You should pay for it." Rice Worm struggled. This was the first time she earned money. How could she let him spend it on her? She had to spend it on herself. Yi Mulin still looked at her and chuckled. "Where did it come from if I don't earn money?" "Oh, I remember now. It must have been taken from my account." "No, it's Gu Changfeng's reward." She was anxious and told him everything. She regretted it as soon as she said it. She blinked her big eyes and looked at him. She was afraid that he would be angry. After all, he cared about Gu Changfeng very much. Unexpectedly, he didn't get angry. He gave her face in front of his subordinates and touched her head. "Our Shueli also earned money. Then we should celebrate it." Rice Worm was touched and found that she fell into his trap, so she stared at him. Lawyer Yi rubbed her face. "Mrs. Yi, I will save money for you." She believed him. However, after half an hour, she almost wanted to strangle him to death. He was the one who picked the clubhouse, and he picked the most luxurious clubhouse in the whole of B City. Even a bottle of wine cost tens of thousands. She counted the money in the bag, but it was not enough. And his subordinates didn't come to drink. They came to drink water as if it was tap water. Bai Shueli sat next to Yimulin and felt sorry for her small money. Secretary Li made her drink 1 or 2 glasses. Even if she didn't drink, her husband would come over and chat with her. She would drink while chatting. At the end of the party, she probably drank a bottle of red wine and was half drunk. When she took the money to pay, it was more than 980,000 yuan. Bai Shueli looked at her husband sideways. Lawyer Yi leaned against the bar and said in a relaxed voice, "I can pay, but there is a condition." "What condition?" Her voice was a little soft. She felt sad when she thought that she could only pay half of the money after a few days of work. Yi Mulin's eyes were a little clear. He stood up and pinched her soft face. "I will tell you when we get home." She watched him pay the bill and couldn't help but ask, "Aren't you angry?" Just as he was about to sign, he paused for a moment, but he still signed quickly. The cashier bowed respectfully. Yi Mulin walked a few steps and then turned his head. "You mean you promised Gu Changfeng to work for him?" She said nothing and just looked at him. She wasn't sure if he would agree, because he hadn't touched the money. Everything he did tonight was probably just to tease her so that she could explain herself clearly. There was nothing going on between her and Gu Changfeng, but she still felt a little guilty. After all, they had been together for a while. However, she wasn't willing to give up such an opportunity so easily. She wasn't greedy to become a star, but she wanted to experience the feeling of earning money. It was a feeling of being on the ground. In the future, she would be a different Bai Shueli. She was not that great. She said that she wanted to realize her value for society, but she just wanted to prove that she was capable. Yi Mulin lowered his head and looked at his little wife's eyes. She was looking at him with such longing and caution. He reached out and held her hand, whispering, "You really want to go, don't you?" Chapter 3450. You won't be short of money. If you need money, you can tell me. He was still unmoved. It was late at night and there were only 2 of them around. That was why he talked to her about it. Bai Shueli was a little disappointed by his words, but she didn't refute. She just looked up at him. Her eyes were full of hurt. Yi Mulin took her hand. "Let's talk about it at home." She stubbornly didn't move. She was a little childish. She was acting like a naughty girl. He knew it after he had been with her for a long time. Yi Mulin stopped and murmured, "Let's talk about it at home. Otherwise, my answer is no." Rice Worm suddenly felt very sad. Her pursed lips trembled. "Yi Mulin, you are too autocratic." He found it funny and stared at the angry girl. "Are you really angry? What do you think?" She walked in front of him angrily. Yi Mulin followed behind her and smiled faintly. After getting in the car, she still didn't say anything. She was still holding the bag in her hand. He looked at her and started the car. They didn't say anything on the way. When they got home, Bai Shueli didn't get out of the car. She said softly, "I want to go." Yi Mulin unfastened the seat belt and looked at her. "Let's talk about it at home." But she stubbornly refused to move. She said again, "I said I want to go." "Yi Mulin, I am not doing it for Gu Changfeng. I am doing it for myself." He looked at her serious face for a long time. He put his hands on the steering wheel and gently knocked on it. Then he said slowly, "How do you know that I won't agree?" Rice Worm was stunned. She asked in disbelief, "You will agree?" He looked at her sideways. "Are you going to get out of the car?" "Your Highness." She immediately acted like a little wife and said without any backbone. Yi Mulin glanced at her and didn't say anything. He directly opened the door and got out of the car. Bai Shueli bit her lips and immediately followed him. In the elevator, he leaned against the wall and looked down at her. Rice Worm couldn't stand his gaze. She immediately hugged his arm and whispered, "Yi Mulin, thank you." He was not moved. He looked very reserved. "I said I have conditions." She didn't make a sound and just hugged him like a spoiled puppy. He frowned. "How old are you? Why are you still acting like a child? I'm 8 or 9 years younger than you." She pressed her face against his shoulder. What's wrong with acting coquettishly? The corner of his mouth curled up slightly, but he didn't say anything else. When they arrived at the apartment, he put her money on the coffee table, unbuttoned his coat, took off his clothes, and threw them on the sofa. Then he sat down and looked at her. They tell me. Bai Shueli's hair stood on end. Explain? Explain what? He looked at her. Tell me about you and Gu Changfeng. Rice Worm immediately bristled. I haven't asked you to tell me about you and Ai Wei. I've kissed her, but not to the extent of a deep kiss. To her surprise, he said it directly. Bai Shueli looked at him blankly. He reached out to hold her hand and dragged her to sit in his arms. He said in a low voice, but we haven't had a kiss. What about you and Gu Changfeng? In his arms, her hair stood on end and she wanted to be held tightly by him. Chapter 34:51. She sat on one of his legs and looked at him in a daze. She knew that he was jealous, but she hadn't thought that he would say it so directly. He pressed harder on her lips, and she let out a soft cry and bit his finger instinctively. Yi Mulin's gaze darkened. He held her sharp chin and asked, Are you angry? I'm not, she said anxiously, and then she looked down and didn't say anything. He noticed her expression and his heart ached, but he told himself that he couldn't afford to be calculative. He had liked her a long time ago, but at that time, she liked Mubai and a lot of boys, or maybe she didn't like him at all. She was just young and playful, and he didn't look for her earlier. In the blink of an eye, Yi Mulin's heart went through 1,000 thoughts, and his expression became much gentler. Rice Worm blinked. You're not angry anymore, right? He looked at her and smiled. Yes, I'm not angry anymore. Rice Worm whimpered and threw herself into his arms. Yi Mulin said in a low voice, But I'll go and talk about the contract, okay? She looked up in his arms and stuck out her tongue. I heard from Secretary Li that you don't even take cases with a commission of millions unless it's a criminal case. It's my wife's love case. Do you think I should take it? He held her chin and said in a dangerous voice. Then he seemed to have thought of something. As for your reward, buy me a gift. She snuggled in his arms comfortably and poked his heart with her little hand. I knew that Lawyer Yi would take advantage of the situation. His eyes darkened again, and he carried her to the master bedroom. He said in a very serious tone, I'll teach you what it means to take advantage of the situation. She exclaimed and said in a low voice, It's already past noon. He had already put her on the soft bed. After kissing her, he raised his hand and looked at the watch on his wrist. There's only half an hour until tomorrow. Why don't we take a bath and come again? This is tomorrow's share. There are 3 times tomorrow. Do you want to do it once, or do you want to do it 3 times tomorrow? Bai Shueli looked at him, not knowing that there was such a calculation. He stammered, I think I'll choose again. But how could she be compared to the big bad wolf's husband? After this time, he would come again. Panting softly, she leaned against his shoulder to say no. We agreed on 1 time. Lawyer Yi directly threw his million-yuan watch into her arms and chuckled. It's already past 12 o'clock, Bai Shueli. In the middle of the night, her voice came from the apartment while gnashing her teeth. Yi Mulin, you are a profiteer. But no matter how he resisted, it was useless. He was still gnawed to the point where not even his bones were left. It was close to 3 o'clock before he went to sleep. He was crazy enough, but the consequence of such wild behavior was that both of them were exhausted. Before falling asleep, she lay in his arms and said weakly, Lawyer Yi, you've been indulging yourself too much recently. He smiled. A man who had been married for less than a year, and his wife was young and beautiful, which man would not indulge her? He patted her back and said hoarsely, Again? She immediately hugged him and complained before falling asleep, I'm so tired. He laughed silently. You didn't even put in the effort. Chapter 34:52. Early in the morning, Bai Shueli was woken up by the phone ringing. When she opened her eyes, there was a phone in her arms. She picked it up in a daze and saw that it was Gu Changfeng. The desire to survive made her wake up at once, and she looked at her husband. Answer it. Yi Mulin lifted the quilt and got up. I'm going to take a shower first. Bai Shueli smiled flatteringly. Honey, you are so sensible. As soon as she finished speaking, she fell into his arms. He kissed her fiercely and held her slender waist tightly. The phone was still ringing. She patted his shoulder and bit her lips, saying in a low voice, Didn't you say that you were going to take a shower? This is the last time. He bit her lips angrily and then let go of her and went to the bathroom. Riceworm looked at his back view and drooled. His back was really tempting and made women want to hug him from behind. She couldn't think about it anymore and answered the phone first. In the bathroom, there was the sound of running water and there was steam. Yi Mulin tried hard not to listen to what his wife and first love said. He told himself to be magnanimous, but being magnanimous was shit. He was so angry that he wanted to strangle her, but he didn't want to. He took a shower in this way for 5 minutes to give her some privacy. When he went out, he only wore a bath towel. His rice worm knelt on the bed and threw the phone aside. She looked pitiful. Yi Mulin, Gu Changfeng will leave tonight. He looked at her and paused for a moment. Then he went to the bedside and took out a cigarette from the cigarette box. After taking a puff, he asked, Do you mean that you are going to elope with someone tonight? It's a job, not elope. She bit her lips and then moved over to hold his arm. You agreed last night. Don't go back on your word. She rubbed her face against his arm and then looked up at him secretly, for fear that he would not agree. Yi Mulin looked down at her. Isn't it your strength to go back on your word? Bai Shueli, if I don't agree, will you run away from home? She was stunned and then said with a smile, Thank you for reminding me, Lawyer Yi. He was so angry that he flicked her head with the cigarette in his hand. She immediately moved away. Don't burn my face. I'll be on camera. Looking at her little face, Yi Mulin sneered, It's better if you're ugly. If you're ugly, you won't run away. She carefully placed her face on his shoulder and softly said, If I was a little uglier, you definitely wouldn't like me so much. Men are all visual creatures. He snorted, I didn't say I liked you. You had a crush, and you've had one for many years, she said with a smile. Yi Mulin chuckled and rubbed her hair. You promised Gu Changfeng, didn't you? She did not dare to utter a sound. He thought for a moment. Stay at home during the day. I'll get off work early in the afternoon and take you out to buy some things. Also, we haven't signed the contract yet, right? Let me make some preparations. If Bai Shueli had known about the contract Yi Mulin had prepared, she would never have let him meet Gu Changfeng. He was too immoral. He was not the aloof Lawyer Yi at all. He was a jealous husband. At this time, she was very happy to see that he agreed. She would not doubt anything else. She smiled and said, Lawyer, get up and go to work tonight. I'll sleep for a while. He pinched her face. Have breakfast with me before you go to bed. Chapter 3453. She looked at him and complained, I'm exhausted. I don't want to eat. He stared at her. If you don't eat, you can save some time, okay? As he said that, he held her chin and hinted, I still have some time. After saying that, Rice Worm immediately came back to life. She got up and squeezed out a fake smile. I'm hungry. As she spoke, she rushed into the dining room. Looking at her back, he smiled and followed her. He was still playing with his phone while eating breakfast. Bai Shueli tilted her head and looked at him secretly. After a while, she asked in a low voice, What are you looking at? Yi Mulin didn't look up and said lightly, I'm looking at an artist's contract. I've never been in this field before. Rice Worm took a bite of the bun. But, do you want to serve female stars? He finally looked up at her and smiled lightly. You. She suddenly felt a little awkward and said in a low voice, I'm not a female star. He smiled and didn't say anything else. He continued to look down. After reading for 5 minutes, he put down his phone and had breakfast. After eating, he got up and kissed the corner of her mouth. Don't sleep too late. Go to the gym when you're free. She looked at him and said slowly, There's a gym here. Then why don't I see you exercising? She poked his chest with her hand and asked, How do you maintain your muscles here? Yi Mulin looked at her and smiled slightly. I exercise in the room every night. Why would I need to go to the gym? She blushed and glared at him. He smiled and kissed her again. I'm leaving. Bai Shueli stood up and pulled his hand. He looked at her sideways. She looked a little uneasy. You really let me go? Are you really not angry? Yi Mulin reached out and touched her hair. Yes, I'm not angry. He changed to a relaxed tone. Our Shueli is going to earn money. What's there to be angry about? She really believed his nonsense. Then at night she felt that her trust had been fed to Xiao Bai. At this moment, she was so touched that she said in a low voice, Yi Mulin, you're so good. She was so touched that she hugged and kissed him. This was probably how the relationship between a man and a woman was at its best. Lawyer Yi went to work with satisfaction. After dealing with the important matters in the morning, he began to help Bai Shueli write the contract. After staying up for a department meeting in the afternoon, he took his handbag and went home. When he returned, the apartment was quiet. He walked in thinking that she was still asleep, but when he walked in, he saw his little wife packing her luggage in the changing room. She was only wearing a pajama with a milk pattern on it, which couldn't hide anything. He put down his briefcase, walked in, and carried her from behind. Why did you bring such a big suitcase? It doesn't look like you're going out for 3 days. It looks more like you're going to elope. Bai Shueli was startled. She turned around in his arms and hugged his shoulders. You have to wear both inside and out. Yi Mulin looked at the big box. She had even prepared the evening dress. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. I heard that it will be taken at an internet celebrity's check-in place. Do you think that you will be attending a banquet? Chapter 3454. Yi Mulin didn't have that intention at first, but when she said that, he looked at her, dragged her over to the dressing mirror and peeled her like a boiled egg. No. She hugged him back. He forced her to look at the mirror and hugged her neatly. His thin lips pressed against the warm skin of her neck. Only I can see your beauty, understand? She hugged him shamefully. He was so bad. Yi Mulin leaned against her. Do you miss me when we go out for a few days? Yes. She picked a pleasant word for him and then bit her lower lip. Yi Mulin, I'm more afraid that you'll misunderstand. She looked up at him. You agreed, but will you trust me? He stared at her eyes and said slowly, My agreement means trust. She looked at him and was slightly touched. He reached out to touch her red lips. If you dare to do anything, I'll break your legs or stew Xiao Bai. You choose one. Yi Mulin. She was furious. I'm the one who's touched. You've ruined the good atmosphere. He smiled. Put on your clothes. Don't catch a cold. She was even angrier. Why did he take off her clothes? She snorted when she was angry. Lawyer Yi helped her pack her suitcase, then looked at her and smiled softly. Are you waiting for me to do something to you? She was furious. I'm not. If not, put on your clothes. It'll be bad if you catch a cold. He smiled and looked at the time. Go out and buy something first. I'll send you to the airport after dinner. No. She threw a tantrum and stared at him with red eyes. You don't miss me at all. You just want me to go out so that you can have a mistress, don't you? Her sudden provocation made him angry and amused. He carried her to the sofa and sat her down. He helped her put on her clothes. Are you unhappy if I don't take you? She hugged him shamelessly. I just want to squeeze you dry. I don't want others to take advantage of you. He couldn't help laughing. What others? Shueli, stop it. She still hugged him and put her face on his shoulder. But I can't bear to leave you. His heart thumped. She had been throwing a tantrum for half a day just for this. Her heart felt warm and soft. He reached out and patted her head. I'll only be gone for a few days. It's not like I won't be back. She wrapped her arms around his waist. I thought you were indifferent. Yi Mulin, Gu Changfeng and I spent a month together. He draped a jacket over her shoulders and glared at her. Are you still being reasonable? If I don't let you go, you say that I'm petty. But if I let you go, you talk so much. Bai Shueli, don't go now. She stuck out her tongue. I know you'll let me go. She looked up and kissed him. I promise I won't do anything to let you down. Or I'll stew little white, she said with a smile. He held onto her little neck and said coldly, I've changed my mind. I only want to break your legs. The rice worm howled and hugged him tightly. He helped her put on her clothes and carefully checked her luggage and the identity cards in her bag like a parent. Finally, he gave her a card and a few thousand yuan in cash. As for her 500,000 yuan, he confiscated it. Bai Shualan bit her lip. Yi Mulin, that's my money. Chapter 3455. She glared at him. I worked hard to earn it. You can't do without my support. Lawyer Yi was already walking out with his luggage. I'll take good care of Xiao Bai. She followed behind him reluctantly and mumbled, I just feel that you've kicked me out. He smiled. How would he dare? When they arrived at the parking lot, he put the suitcase in the trunk, opened the door of the passenger seat for her and held it while waiting for her. Bai Shueli stood there and didn't seem to want to get in the car. He smiled and said, It looks like I forced you to go. Only then did she get into the car. Yi Mulin closed the door for her. When he got into the car, he sat down and said in a low voice, Shirley, have you thought about it? What would you think if I didn't let you go? She turned her head to look at him in a daze. Yi Mulin smiled and said, If marriage is a siege, you'll sometimes feel that it's better to get some fresh air. I don't mind, but don't touch the flowers and plants on the road. You'll feel, he put his finger on her lips and pressed it gently. It's definitely not as good as the ones at home. She was stunned. Yi Mulin, you think too highly of yourself. He smiled warmly. It's your reaction that makes me feel confident and accomplished, Mrs. Yi. She blushed and ignored him. He smiled and started the car. She had promised to buy him a gift, so she wasn't surprised that he drove the car to the underground parking lot of the mall. She was worried about her money as soon as she got out of the car. She kept saying, You can't buy anything too expensive. It's $500,000. He pinched her face. Who wants to buy jewelry that's worth tens of millions every day? It's normal for women to go shopping, but it's a sin for men to spend money. She counted her white fingers and thought of something. And I've read Chicken Soup for the Soul. It says that men can't dress up too well or they'll betray their wives. Yi Mulin put his arm around her shoulder. Which mean woman said that? It's your mother, she said honestly and then forced a smile, looking very happy. Yi Mulin was speechless. He couldn't tell her not to talk to her mother, could he? He took her to a brand store, which had both men's and women's clothing. Bai Shueli looked at him. You want to buy clothes? He glanced at her and went to pick out clothes. Because it was late autumn, he chose a dark gray cashmere sweater and a pair of khaki trousers. He didn't even try them on and stuffed them into her hands. Go pay. Why do I have to pay? Isn't the money with you? She exploded. Yi Mulin smiled. I didn't bring any money. Rice Worm cursed under his breath and took out the money. Fortunately, it was not expensive. The two items added up only cost about 2,000. After paying, she counted her wallet, and her heart ached. But when he left, he still saw a long windbreaker hanging on the wall. It was very nice and suited him very well. She paused. How about this one? Lawyer Yi looked at her. Do you still have money? She counted the money she had and hesitated. But this one is really nice. In the end, she couldn't help but take it down and let him try. It was indeed beautiful. Looking at the price, it was 6,800 yuan. It wasn't expensive, but she only had the 2,000 to 3,000 yuan that Huang Shuren gave her. When the shop assistant asked, she shook her head and said, I don't think so. Yi Mulin put it on and swiped his card. She hugged his arm. Didn't you say that you didn't bring any money? Chapter 3456. Oh, she replied. She felt that they were really going to be separated. Yi Mulin lowered his head and reached out to stroke her hair. Call me every day if you can't bear to. Oh, she replied again and looked up at him. She couldn't help but reach out and hug his waist. The salesgirl in the store felt her heart melt. This couple was really in love. She raised her phone and took a few photos. It was still early, So Yi Mulin took her to the Cartier counter downstairs. She looked at him. What else do you want to buy? Didn't you buy a gift? All she could think of was that he was going to spend her money again. Yi Mulin glanced at her and asked the salesgirl to bring out a pair of rings. The salesgirl smiled and took them out and put them on the counter. Yi Mulin dragged the young lady beside him. Try it on. She muttered, I have a wedding ring. He endured it. Mubai was the one who bought the wedding ring, and he didn't have it. He didn't have it. And she didn't know how to flirt, so his face was a little dark. Bai Shueli looked at him carefully. She felt that he was really narrow-minded and easily got angry. She hummed and tried it on. The ring was just right. At this moment, Yi Mulin also tried it on. He was just right. He didn't take it off and paid the bill. When they came out, his little wife was still thinking about her assets. Yi Mulin, this money isn't coming from my 500,000 yuan, is it? He couldn't take it anymore and stopped. Is this the main point? Why isn't it the main point? She muttered softly. She only dared to mutter, don't be so awkward today. You're like an old man going through menopause. You're so weird. When she said that, he remembered that she had made fun of him last night, saying that he was an old man. His face darkened and he walked in front of her. She immediately followed him. He ignored her. She hugged his arm. Lawyer Yi said, didn't you say that I'm an old man? Why are you still pestering me? She hugged his arm tightly and said honestly, even if you're an old man, you're still a rich old man. I can take it just because of this. She even gave a fake smile. Yi Mulin could not take it anymore and tried to shake her off. However, she was like a sticky candy that he could not shake off no matter how hard he tried. After a while she whispered, I know you're jealous, aren't you? Lawyer Yi, it doesn't exist. You are jealous. You are jealous that Gu Changfeng is younger than you and knew me earlier than you. She said happily. He suddenly stopped and said softly, something's wrong. She looked at him. He smiled faintly. I met you earlier than him, a few years earlier. Her expression softened as she hugged him. That's why it's all your fault. You liked me but didn't tell me. Now, you're throwing a weird tantrum and asking me to go. You're doing all these little tricks. Yi Mulin, you're really childish. As she spoke, her small hand gently drew something on his back. When he realized what she had written, all the unwillingness and injustice in his heart were soothed and his body slowly relaxed. He whispered, Shueli, am I difficult to get along with? It's okay. Menopause is always like this. My mother used to be like this too. She said with a smile. The eldest son of the Yi family's face darkened again. He felt that he would die of anger because of her sooner or later. Chapter 3457. During the meal, he didn't say anything. Bai Shueli was a little uneasy, afraid that he was really angry. But when they got in the car, he kissed her for a while. She really couldn't understand him, but she was too lazy to figure it out. Sitting in the car, she looked at the rings on her hand and then looked at his. Yi Mulin held the steering wheel and suddenly said, when you get there, don't forget to call me every day. If you can come back early, I can pick you up in Sea City. Such simple words made her feel a little sad. She couldn't tell what she was feeling. After a long time, she said, if the shooting is done, I will come back early. But you don't need to pick me up. Gu Changfeng and I will come back all the way. I don't trust you. His voice was low in the dusk. You almost never go far. Rice Worm smiled dryly. I used to go abroad for fun. Did you forget that I studied abroad? Yi Mulin smiled and said after a pause, Shueli, in my heart, your life started when you married me. She was a little confused. Was there such an algorithm? But okay, it seemed a little sweet. As night fell, the lights on the highway were turned on, like a bright long dragon. She suddenly opened the window childishly and said loudly to the outside, Yi Mulin, what do you think it would be good if we drove on this road without reaching the end? She didn't expect him to answer her. He would think she was childish. But to her surprise, Yi Mulin answered her. He didn't answer her directly but asked her, if so, Bai Shueli, are you willing? Are you willing to be with me forever? She was stunned. She was leaning against the window, but now she slowly turned her head to look at him. He was still looking forward and driving, as if he didn't say those words to her, as if he had never said them. She hesitated and said after a long time, "If it's you, I think I'm willing." Yi Mulin clenched his fingers and said in a hoarse voice, "Remember what you said today." She said in a daze and then said hurriedly, "Yi Mulin, I think you lack a sense of security." He smiled gently, which was how a husband should be. She sat in the chair, biting her finger as she looked at him. She suddenly remembered how he used to be rough with her, hitting her, forcing her, and doing all kinds of bad things. If it wasn't for the photo evidence, she really didn't want to believe that he liked her. Suddenly, he grabbed her with one hand and said in a low and hoarse voice, "Close the window. Don't catch a cold." "Oh," she replied and tilted her head to look at him. Yi Mulin was still indifferent, but she felt a little warm. When she arrived at the airport, she called Gu Changfeng first. Gu Changfeng had already arrived and soon found them in the parking lot. The agreement was signed on the hood of the car. Gu Changfeng took a look at it but did not sign it immediately. Instead, he let Bai Shueli have a look. Bai Shueli felt a little strange and took a look at it. "What's wrong?" Gu Changfeng smiled. "I'll take a look." "Oh," she replied and read it carefully. There was no problem at the front, but there was a striking line at the last line. No feelings outside of a working relationship are allowed between both parties. Chapter 3458. Yi Mulin picked up the paper and said casually, "You can't go if you don't sign it. Think about it." She turned her head angrily. "You've shown your true colors, haven't you? I've always been like this." He was in a good mood and didn't mind being laughed at by Gu Changfeng. Gu Changfeng's eyes fell on the ring on Yi Mulin's finger and the Cartier ring on Bai Shueli's finger. He smiled lightly, "Just sign it. It's nothing." Bai Shueli was so angry that she wanted to cry. She didn't want to talk to Yi Mulin anymore. The last contract was signed by two men. Lawyer Yi said while signing, "Only minors under 18 years old need their parents to sign on their behalf." "How old are you, Bai Shueli?" She was so angry. His face was even bigger than AP share. After signing, she put the contract on his chest and walked into the hall with her suitcase. Gu Changfeng didn't follow her immediately. He put away the pen and smiled lightly. "Do you always like to bully her like this?" "Do I?" Yi Mulin smiled and put his hands in his pocket. "This is the fun between husband and wife. Mr. Gu, you may not understand." Gu Changfeng also smiled. He looked at the entrance and suddenly sighed, "But I know Bai Shueli better than you do. She needs to be treated well, or she would rather not have you." Yi Mulin's eyes changed slightly. He remembered the last time Bai Shueli ran away from home. She said to him, "Yi Mulin, if you don't like me, I don't want to like you either." Gu Changfeng really knew her well. He smiled coldly, still stood there and lit a cigarette. "I won't see her off. Goodbye, Mr. Gu." Gu Changfeng smiled and reached out his hand. Yi Mulin looked at him and was a little confused, but he still reached out his hand and shook it. Gu Changfeng smiled lightly. "Lawyer Yi, don't worry. I will take care of her." The corners of Yi Mulin's mouth twitched. He really didn't want to reveal too much emotion in front of his rival in love. Actually, he was feeling a little regretful. Why did he let her go and go out with her ex-lover? They ate and slept together for 3 days. But if he regretted it now and dragged her back, she would definitely argue with him for a long time. Besides, it was not Yi Mulin's style. After saying that, Yi Mulin made up his mind and drove away. He didn't even say goodbye to the rice worm. Perhaps he was still angry in his heart. When Gu Changfeng arrived at the airport lobby, Bai Shueli had already checked her luggage. Seeing him coming over, she asked in a low voice, "Did he say anything?" Seeing his little wife's expression, Gu Changfeng felt funny and sad, but he still teased her. "Which one? Gu Changfeng?" She shouted angrily. Gu Changfeng smiled. "Yi Mulin has already left." He didn't say anything. She stared blankly for a moment. Her expression was one of shock and disappointment. He saw it all. Gu Changfeng coughed and said, "Why? Are you reluctant to let him go?" "It's not like I can't bear to part with him." He's so stubborn and has such a weird temper, she complained. Her expression was very interesting. Gu Changfeng nodded and said slowly, he has a very high opinion of you. Bai Xueli stared blankly for a moment before saying, what did he say? Didn't you say he didn't say anything? Chapter 3459. Riceworm was annoyed. Don't believe him. He means that he will dislike me if I stay at home and do nothing. Gu Changfeng took the plane ticket and walked to the security checkpoint with her. He smiled and said, Xueli, do you think he really dislikes you? She looked at him for a few seconds and walked into the security checkpoint without saying anything. Gu Changfeng followed her and didn't ask any more. They didn't talk much on the plane. When they arrived at Sea City, Gu Changfeng took her to the hotel. The rooms were next to each other. After settling down, they went to have dinner together. Sea City was very prosperous, with the unique style of the water town in the south of the Yangtze River. Bai Xuelan sat in the restaurant and looked at the night view outside. She couldn't help thinking that it would be nice if Yi Mulin could come and have a look. He was too serious and it was suitable for him to relax in the water town in the south of the Yangtze River. She was a little lost in thought. Gu Changfeng took a sip of tea and asked, what are you thinking about? I was thinking that it would be great if Yi Mulin could come. She blurted out, but then she felt a little awkward. Gu Changfeng, I'm sorry. There's nothing to be sorry about. I'm happy that you're doing well. Gu Changfeng smiled. Since you're here, you should relax. She nodded and held her arms. After a while, she looked at Gu Changfeng. It's past 9 o'clock. Let's go back to the hotel. Gu Changfeng looked at her face and sighed. Xueli, you've changed a lot. She looked at him and touched her face. Have I become more beautiful? He shook his head and smiled, saying nothing more. They walked back to the hotel. The night was like water and the autumn was cool. Gu Changfeng kicked the stones on the road and said, Xueli, are you very happy now? She walked forward with her arms crossed and said softly, Gu Changfeng, I don't know what other people's happiness looks like, but I don't think I'm willing to make do with it. She paused and raised her head to look at him. I've always liked Mubai. I thought that the deepest feeling was to desperately want to obtain something, but now I know that's not the case. Only when you've obtained something will it be unforgettable. Everything that you haven't obtained can become smoke in the past. Gu Changfeng stared at her. The night wind blew her hair. Her face was fair and pure, and she didn't have much makeup on. He said that she had changed a lot, and he meant it. She used to chase after material things, but now she only wanted Yi Mulin. It was just that she had not realized it yet. Gu Changfeng smiled. This was what he wanted in front of the camera, but it no longer belonged to him. It belonged to Yi Mulin. He reached out his hand, hesitated for a moment, and stroked her long hair. Let's go back to the hotel and give him a call. Otherwise, he won't be at ease. He thought that he should let it go. Wasn't the most profound love for the other party's happiness? He didn't care if this happiness was brought to her by himself. As long as she was happy. Bai Xueli nodded and walked back to the hotel together. She called Yi Mulin first. That person was still a little angry and absent-minded. Riceworm was furious. You asked me to call you, but you're not enthusiastic at all. Lawyer Yi was speechless. Who's going to quench my fire when I'm passionate? Riceworm immediately hung up. He was too shameless. If you talk about feelings with him, he will try to seduce you. Shameless, shameless to the core. Chapter 3460. Bai Xueli hung up the phone and poured out all her luggage. She found her pajamas and prepared to take a bath and have a beauty sleep. She ran to the bathroom with her pajamas and facial mask. She filled the tub with hot water and checked her phone to see if Yi Mulin would call her again. In the end, there was no call or message. What the hell? She soaked in the bathtub with a facial mask on her face. She thought gloomily that he must be very happy that she went out. Didn't married men like freedom the most? He could do whatever he wanted without his wife by his side. No, she had to check on him. She grabbed her phone and was about to make a call when she suddenly felt uncomfortable in her stomach, especially in her stomach. It was very uncomfortable and she wanted to vomit but couldn't. She put on her pajamas and leaned over the toilet for a long time, but she didn't vomit. Her heart was so stuffy that she thought she might be sick. She ran outside and leaned on the sofa to search on Baidu Weekly, "What's with the nausea and vomiting?" The results came out. All of them said that she might be pregnant. Pregnant. Riceworm's brain exploded as if she was struck by lightning. She searched on Baidu again to find out that she was pregnant. After reading the netizens' answers, she found out that there was a thing called a pregnancy test. She put on her clothes in a hurry and ran downstairs with her uncomfortable body. She wanted to know if she was pregnant now. When she went downstairs, although her body was very uncomfortable, she felt very strange because she might be pregnant. A child with Yi Mulin. She didn't want to be pregnant so soon, but he seemed to want one. She bit her lower lip and looked at her pale face in the mirror. She felt that she had never looked so good before. When she ran out of the hotel, she felt that it was very dangerous for a pregnant woman to walk on the street. She slowed down and carefully held her belly. Pregnant women had to be careful for the sake of the baby. After a few minutes, she found a 24-hour pharmacy. After she went in, she mumbled for a long time before she expressed her intention. The shop assistant immediately gave her a box of pregnancy tests. She paid and ran back to the hotel to have it tested. She still felt uncomfortable and wanted to vomit. However, this discomfort made her feel like she was floating, and the discomfort turned into happiness. When she was done, she gently removed her hand and looked at the 2 red lines on it. She let out a cry. She was pregnant. What to do? She was pregnant. She hurriedly took out her phone and called Yi Mulin. When the phone rang, she was so excited that she did not know what to do with him. She thought that he would be very happy to know that she was pregnant. The phone rang 5 or 6 times before it was connected. Bai Shueli did not directly say that she was pregnant. Instead, she asked sweetly, "Lawyer Yi, are you still earning money to support your family?" A chuckle came from the other side. "I'm on a date with a woman." Bai Shueli did not say anything. His voice became gentler. "Are you angry again?" "I'm taking a shower." "Oh," she replied dejectedly. Yi Mulin sighed. "I heard you were quite happy just now. What made you so happy?" She forced herself to be happy and kept him in suspense. "You'd better work hard. In the future, there will be more people to support." Chapter 3461. Riceworm suddenly felt that his delicate body had become more expensive. He replied in a very reserved manner, "Yes, are you happy?" After waiting for a long time, he said, "Wait for me." After saying that, he hung up the phone. On the other side, Riceworm was a little confused. What did he mean by waiting for him? It was late at night. She didn't want to wait for him to finish his shower. She wanted to sleep. So she resisted the feeling of nausea and lay down on the bed. Her dream was full of a nest of cute bunnies that she gave birth to for Yi Mulin. She fell asleep in a daze and felt very uncomfortable. She ran to the bathroom several times but still felt a little nauseous. Looking in the mirror, Riceworm felt that she was very great and kept convincing herself that all children were like this. Mothers had to sacrifice themselves. At this time, she even wanted to call her mother and tell her how she felt. She wanted to tell her that she could understand her mother's feelings in the past. She lay dizzy, but her heart was full of happiness. She didn't know how long she had stayed up. She only felt that the light was bright. She opened her eyes and looked at her watch. It was already 2 o'clock at night. Oh, it was so uncomfortable. She missed Yi Mulin so much. She held the pillow in her arms childishly. If only he was here. She even thought about going back to B City. It would be best if she could immediately throw herself into his warm embrace. Just as she was feeling anxious, there was a knock on the door. Bai Shueli was stunned for a moment. Then she sat up and looked at the door. Could it be a bad guy? It couldn't be. This was a 5-star hotel. There wouldn't be a bad guy knocking on the door, would there? Or a small card. It couldn't be either. She got up boldly and squatted at the door for a while. There was a knock on the door again. This time she was sure that it was her door. She bit her lip and was about to call the front desk when her phone rang. She ran over and saw that it was Yi Mulin. She picked it up and said in a low voice, "Yi Mulin, Someone is knocking on my door. I am a little scared. Yi Mulin paused and said, Why didn't you call Gu Changfeng? She said, Oh, I just remembered that I called him. No, it's me at the door. His voice was particularly hoarse and deep. Bai Shueli gasped. He said again, Open the door. She was still confused. After a long time she said, It's you. He grunted, It's me. Bai Shueli bit her lower lip and felt indescribably happy. She immediately went to open the door. He stood at the door, looking travel-worn. There was a duffel bag at his feet. It was obvious that he had left in a hurry. She gritted her teeth. How can there be a flight so late? My father's private plane arrived in Sea City and called for a military helicopter. He looked at her and smiled. Because I want this little guy to be the first to let his father sense it. She leaned against the door, and he slowly walked forward, his voice hoarse. Shirley, I'm very happy. He came over and hugged her. His warm palm was placed flat on her lower abdomen, touching it very tenderly. She bit her lip and her eyes were watery. Yi Mulin, are you really happy? He grunted and chuckled. Yes, I'm very happy. Chapter 3462. Yi Mulin was amused and annoyed at the same time. He reached out and touched her head. How can you kiss away the child? Nonsense. She still looked at him and said childishly, I was nauseous just now, but now that you've kissed me, I don't feel nauseous anymore. Her words pleased him. He held her head and kissed her for a while before whispering against her forehead, Shueli, I'm really happy. She leaned against the door and snorted. You only value the child but not me. He held her in his arms and entered the room. He picked up the luggage and smiled. If I don't value you, how can I look forward to this child? As he spoke, he began to pack the luggage. A few clothes were hung up at once. Bai Shueli followed behind him and asked in a low voice, How long will you stay here? He hung up the clothes and turned around. I'll accompany you back to B City. Rice Worm stuttered again. Aren't you very busy? Yi Mulin sat on the armchair and pulled her onto his lap. He smiled and said, You're pregnant. Don't you want me to accompany you? She lay on his shoulder obediently and felt a little uneasy. But you're very busy. Can you really stay here with me for a few days? She looked at him and said, You won't leave suddenly, will you? He smiled. No, I'll be with you all the time. Rice Worm hugged his neck happily. Yi Mulin, you're so nice. He kissed her. Are you still uncomfortable? I'll go take a shower first. Her eyes were sparkling. It was the most beautiful look in love. Then, Mr. Yi, I'll wait for you in bed. He patted her. Don't be naughty. She hugged him and kissed him. I miss you very much. After saying that, she wanted to leave, but she was held by his big hand. Yi Mulin looked at her and said in a low voice, We've only been separated for less than a day. She blinked and said, But I feel like we've been separated for a long time. Then she hugged him. I just miss you. His heart was a little wet. He couldn't describe the feeling. It felt like his heart was overflowing. There was nowhere to put it. He held his little wife in his arms and said in a low voice, Shueli. Yes. She was obedient in his arms. Although her body was still uncomfortable, she felt much better being hugged by him like this. Yi Mulin said in a low voice, I love you. Do you know that? Rice Worm's body stiffened. He raised his head and accidentally hit Lawyer Ye's chin. But his expression was still very gentle, and he looked at his wife very tenderly. She bit her lip in disbelief. Are you telling the truth? He only smiled without saying a word. She blinked and pulled his hand, saying softly, Yi Mulin, can you say that again? He patted her and got up. I'm going to take a bath. She clung to him and followed behind him. She hugged his arm and made a fuss. Yi Mulin, say it again. He stood at the door of the bathroom and turned to look at her with the unique expression of Lawyer Yi. Shower with me or wait for you in bed. Choose one. After a long time, Rice Worm finally came to his senses. He shrieked, You beast! She ran away, and he took off his bathrobe. Looking at her back, he smiled. Chapter 3463. He went over and took her phone. You're still playing with your phone when you're pregnant. She bit her lip. I want to post it on my WeChat moments. Several of my classmates have given birth and they're showing off their babies all day long. I want to do it too. He looked at her. What are you showing off? Are you showing off your tummy? It's not big. She sat on the bed. I'm bored. Shouldn't you accompany me first before taking a bath? She said with some grievance. He looked at her and smiled. He sat on the bed and put her on his lap. I'm with you now. She pouted. I feel dizzy and I want to throw up. He said, I'll take you to the hospital tomorrow morning for a checkup. Then he thought of something. Did you buy a pregnancy test yourself? Her eyes were sparkling. Yi Mulin, you know about this? He pinched her cheek. This is common sense. She lay in his arms shyly and said softly, Do you think it's a boy or a girl? Either is fine as long as it's fine. He couldn't help but rub her hair. She said, Oh, and lay in his arms obediently. I want a boy. He looked down at her. Bai Shueli put her arms around his neck. You'll feel less pressure if you give birth to a boy. Dad and Mom both want a boy to inherit the Yi family. He felt satisfied again and murmured, It doesn't matter. It's just that we didn't give birth to a boy and we still have Mubai. Is he okay? She raised her little face and asked naughtily. He knocked her and said, Naughty. Bai Shueli squinted and smiled. She lay on the bed and said coquettishly, I feel dizzy and I still want to throw up. He frowned. Is it very uncomfortable? It was his first time getting married and his wife's first pregnancy, so he had no experience. Rice Worm nodded. It's very uncomfortable. Yi Mulin, I think it's great to be a mother. She touched her non-existent belly and said softly, But I think he's very cute. He chuckled. He's so small. How can you see that he's cute? He's cute. She blinked, but her expression soon changed. No, I have to go to the bathroom. He supported her and was a little worried. Do you still feel like vomiting? No, I want to. Bai Shueli frowned and looked pitiful. She quickly ran to the bathroom and closed the door. He knocked on the door worriedly. Shirley, don't come in. I'll be fine in a while. Her voice was a little uncomfortable and weak. He let out a long sigh. All right, I'll wait for you at the door. However, in less than 5 minutes, he couldn't help but push the door open and enter. After entering, he saw her sitting on the toilet with a pale face and a worried expression. Yi Mulin, will I accidentally pull the baby out? He was annoyed and amused at the same time. He went forward and gently knocked her head. Idiot! She was a little dazed from the slap. Her heart was sweet at first, but her expression quickly changed. Get out, I'm going to have diarrhea again. Later, not only did he have diarrhea, but he also vomited. Yi Mulin contacted a gynecologist in Sea City overnight. It was already 4:30 a.m. by the time he sent her over. The rice worm was a little empty. In the car, she lay weakly on his lap and said softly, Yi Mulin, am I very useless? Chapter 3464. His heart was full of heartache. He kissed her and said, Don't talk. We'll talk when we get to the hospital. She reached out and hugged his waist. She closed her eyes and endured it for a while before she said softly, Yi Mulin, I feel much better when you hug me like this. Silly girl. His voice was low and hoarse. He lowered his head and kissed her. Oh, don't talk anymore. We'll get to the hospital soon. She nodded and closed her eyes obediently. She just leaned her fluffy little head against him and pressed it a little tighter. Yi Mulin raised his eyes and looked at the white sky outside. His heart was filled with infinite pity. There was also a trace of reluctance in this pity. It was an emotion he had never felt before. The car soon arrived at the Women's and Children's Hospital in Sea City. The doctor who came to diagnose was the best gynecologist in Sea City. Yi Mulin took the rice worm in and left. He was a little worried and smoked outside. After 10 minutes, a voice came from inside. Mr. Yi. He quickly put out the cigarette and walked in quickly. As soon as he entered, he saw his rice worm looking dejected. Her little face was pale and uneasy. He went over and didn't talk to the doctor first. Instead, he reached out and touched her head. He asked warmly, "What's wrong?" Bai Shueli raised her head. Her eyes were filled with tears, but she said softly with her last bit of stubbornness, "Yi Mulin, I'm not pregnant. I'm just not used to this place. Will you laugh at me? Will you be disappointed? Will you think that I'm useless?" When she said that, her lips trembled slightly. It was obvious how big the blow was. Yi Mulin brought her into his arms. Her little head was pressed against his chest. He reached out and rubbed it. "We'll have a child soon, okay?" She bit her lips in his arms. "Will you take back what you said?" "What?" He smiled. The rice worm suddenly became shy and said in a small voice, "You said you love me?" She looked up and her eyes were full of little stars. Those little stars were shining with anticipation and fear. Yi Mulin smiled and reached out to rub her head. "How can I take back what I said?" She still looked at him. He smiled and whispered as if he was coaxing a child, "I don't want to take it back either." His little millet worm let out an "oh" and leaned against his chest in relief. The female doctor was exasperated and amused at the same time. As she prescribed the medicine, she said, "I wanted to say a few words of consolation, but now that I see that you should be fine, I'll prescribe a box of medicine. If there are still adverse reactions after taking it, then you might have to stay in the hospital for an 4-drip, or go home." Bai Shueli tugged at his sleeve. "I haven't finished filming yet. I don't want to go home." Yi Mulin patted her. "I'll stay with you." She was relieved but not so relieved. After returning to the hotel and taking the medicine, she felt much better and more energetic. She leaned in his arms to catch up on sleep. But after experiencing so many thrilling things in one night, she couldn't fall asleep. She always felt that she had obtained some kind of treasure, but she couldn't tell what kind of treasure it was. She leaned against him and whispered, "Yi Mulin, can you say that again? The words I said I love you?" He smiled and looked down at her. She did not speak, but only looked at him. Chapter 3465. As he said that, he pulled her into his arms and whispered a few words. She hugged him and didn't speak anymore. He patted her and coaxed her to sleep. When she was in a daze, he whispered, "Shueli, you want a child, don't you?" He was so happy to see her pregnant. He had never seen her so happy before. Bai Shueli opened her eyes. She just opened her eyes a little and said vaguely, "Yes, I really want one." She put her little face in his arms and said childishly, "I promise I won't be called Yi Mu Bai. I'll just be called Yi Xiao Bai, okay?" He glared at her. "It sounds like an idiot's child." "You're the idiot." She hit his lower abdomen as revenge. Yi Mulin smiled and held her in his arms to coax her to sleep. The sky was turning white and it was finally dawn. However, she slept very deeply and didn't wake up until noon. When she woke up, although her head was still a little dizzy, she didn't feel uncomfortable or nauseous anymore. Although she felt much better, she was still a little sad about this mistake. She touched her belly and felt that she had a miscarriage. Yi Mulin put down the notebook in his hand and sat on the bed. "Are you hungry? I'll ask someone to send some light food over." She sat on the bed and nodded. "Okay, I'm a little hungry." He went to call customer service. After that, Bai Shueli asked him, "Is Gu Changfeng here?" He went to check the location in the morning. He said that if you have the strength in the afternoon, you can go tomorrow. He came over and touched her long hair. He smiled. "Don't worry, I didn't tell him that you're pregnant." "I'm not pregnant." Rice worm pursed her lips. "I'm so disappointed." He smiled. "We'll have a child soon." She hugged the pillow and felt a little disappointed. "I suddenly miss Xiao Bai." Yi Mulin kissed her for a while. The customer service sent a light lunch and he ate with her. Bai Shueli didn't have a good appetite, but she ate a little. Then she looked at him. "Actually, you don't have to eat this with me. You can eat something better." He smiled and said, "It's not that troublesome. When you're better, let's go eat barbecue together, okay?" She knew that he wanted to cheer her up. However, she thought about it and said softly, "I don't want to. I'm afraid you'll have a stomachache again." She forced a smile at him. "I'm fine now. Actually, you can go back to B-City if you have something to do." He looked at her and sighed. "How can I rest assured when you're like this?" These were probably the best words of love. How could Rice Worm resist it? She smiled at him, then climbed up and walked behind him to hug him gently. She pressed her face against his back and said softly, "Yi Mulin, I really want to be with you forever." He held one of her hands and smiled. Silly girl. She simply hugged him and acted coquettishly. Yi Mulin had no choice but to pull her into his arms and kiss her carefully for a while. He kissed her until her blood was boiling. Only when there was a knock on the door did he let go of her and let her continue to eat while he went to open the door. It was Gu Changfeng at the door. He looked at Yi Mulin and nodded. "How is Xueli?" Before Yi Mulin said anything, Bai Xueli immediately said in a hurry, "I'm very good, very good. I can go to the shoot in the afternoon." Yi Mulin walked over and knocked her head with dissatisfaction. "Don't be restless at all." Chapter 3466. As soon as he finished his words, Rice Worm looked at him eagerly. Yi Mulin smiled. "What? Is there a problem, Mrs. Yi?" Mrs. Yi thought that he was naive, and shameless. It was obvious that he was declaring his sovereignty in front of Gu Changfeng. Men were all so superficial, naive. But as Mrs. Yi, she still had to show some respect to Mr. Yi, so she whispered, "Of course." Gu Changfeng smiled, but he felt bitter in his heart. Yi Mulin rubbed his wife's hair. "It's not that I didn't want to eat just now, but now I have a good appetite." She bit her lips and stared at him. Couldn't he show some respect to her? The shooting in the afternoon went well, which was out of Gu Changfeng's expectation. Bai Xueli was in a very good state. She wore a checkered shirt. She didn't need to pretend to be very young. She just looked like she was loved. Her eyes were shining when she looked at Yi Mulin. This group of first love did not belong to Gu Changfeng or Bai Xueli, but Yi Mulin. Gu Changfeng took this group of photos with his long lens. But after that, he seemed to have finished a journey in his life. He wanted to name this group of photos Letting Go. As expected, the photos won a prize a month later. An authoritative gold prize in Berlin was broadcast live on many TV stations. Yi Mulin and Bai Xueli sat on the sofa at home and watched it. Mrs. Yi held her face. "Wow, Gu Changfeng took such a beautiful picture of me." Mr. Yi tilted his head and looked at his wife. "It's because I raised you well." Then he coughed. "Don't you want to have a baby?" As he spoke, he picked her up and walked towards the bedroom. Bai Xueli put her arms around his neck and smiled. "Mr. Yi, you are jealous." "Yes, I am jealous, and the consequences will be serious." He lowered his head and bit her lips. Rice Worm looked at him softly and was put on the bed by him. She put her arms around his neck and begged, "Stop it, okay?" He kissed her. "I want it." Those 3 words had crushed her. It turned out that if he liked someone, as long as he said 3 simple words, as long as he wanted it, she would be willing. When it was over, she lay in his arms and whispered, "Yi Mulin, do you think you're pregnant this time?" He smiled and touched her little head. "If I can't get pregnant, I'll try again next time." She crawled over and lay in his arms. Her little hand gently drew on his chest. Her hair was also scattered on his body, tangling together. Yi Mulin kissed her. "Go take a shower." "Oh," she replied as he carried her to the bathroom. After washing up, he went to the study to deal with some matters. Bai Xueli lay on the bed alone, her small hand stroking the white pillow. Her heart was in a sweet mess. After returning from Sea City for a month, he treated her very well. He would come home very early every night, and even if he was late, he would call her and ask her to go home with him to the office. Their life was like that of an old married couple. It was very ordinary. If it was in the past, she would definitely not find it interesting. But now, she felt that it was very good, so good that she felt that it would be good to continue like this. But there was only a baby left. She thought with some happiness. Then she secretly went to the bathroom and took a pregnancy test. It was still a red line. She was a little depressed. She had worked very hard and Yi Mulin was also very good. Why didn't she get pregnant last month? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.